So I'm here in the middle of a park on a lovely sunny day with Carlie, and as we've spoken earlier on the show, we're here to talk about suicide prevention and talk to people who've suffered losses and who've been through these sort of situations. And Carlie is unique because you're a mental health nurse yourself, and your mother was also a mental health nurse. So tell us a bit about your mother.
Where to begin? She was the life and soul of the party.
Right.
Very kind individual, huge family person. Did everything she could for her kids. She lived for her kids. So many friends. Just a bubbly character, which is often the kind of characters you hear that this kind of stuff happens to. Also very sensitive. But she moved into the field of mental health. A few years she'd done a degree and moved into be a very high level mental health professional herself. So she was actually in charge of helping when sectioning people,
right,
so making those decisions really of when that needed to happen.
So quite at the high end, really.
Yeah, and I think it was because she knew about mental health herself and understood, that was an important part of the process, and she was passionate about getting the right help for people.
When obviously you was with your mother, did you ever feel that she was in a high pressure job, and did she let on that, I've had a real hard day at work today?
Absolutely, yeah. That's the reason we lost her. Yeah. It was because she had a nervous breakdown, because she was so stressed at work and worked this high pressure job and was helping everybody else but herself. It was just the person she was, and she suffered, unfortunately, a nervous breakdown a year prior to us losing her, dying by suicide, and that's the way it went.
What sort of instant effect did that have on you, and what sort of long-term effects that it's had on you?
Gosh, what question.
Sorry to ask it, but...
Yeah, I feel instantly it changed my world. I wasn't aware of mental health very well before. I wasn't aware of suicide prevention. But as soon as it happened, it's been my whole world since, unfortunately, and it is for everybody that suffers it. And now it's my world in a different way. I've really turned it around, and that's why I'm working in the profession. I actually lost my job in COVID, which was completely unrelated to mental health.
Right.
And a friend saw a post and knew that I was doing everything I could to try and change things in the mental health world, and said, you'd be good at that, you should apply for it. And I did, and now it's what I do full time.
What do you see now on a daily basis? What sort of problems are people going through, especially with COVID? Has the requirement for your sort of professionals gone up? And do you see people suffering every day? And are people reaching out to you?
People find it hard to reach out, definitely. And COVID has meant that a lot of people are isolated. They're not getting the help, whether they reach out or they do reach out. The demand is so much higher in mental health services. But ultimately, it is that isolation, that disconnect at the moment with the world is why a lot of people are suffering.
Why do people feel that they can't reach out? People will be watching and think, well, surely if people are in trouble, then why aren't they reaching out? Why do you think that is?
I think people that suffer with depression, in my experience, don't find it easy to reach out.
Right.
And anxiety, high anxiety as well. It's a barrier to getting the help. And knowing where to go. People don't know where the resources are, and sometimes people have had bad experiences with mental health services. We all know mental health services aren't up to scratch, and it's something that we're collectively, we need to work on together, really.
What needs to be done? So what does the government need to do, and what is it doing right, and what is it doing wrong or not doing?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and actually something that happened to me in my experience, and which was part of my bereavement, was I was so passionate about making change and making people stand up for what had happened that I spent about 2 years talking to the NHS and bringing an investigation of what had happened. And I'd realised, and I hope a lot of other people learn this really through my own experience, lots of people that have been bereaved by suicide will be thinking about the NHS staff and on the ground and how people didn't do the right job. But actually what I've learned is it is government level, and everybody within the NHS is working towards the same standards set by government.
Right.
What needs to happen is it has to be up there,
Right.
top level through the government, not people being blamed on the ground, because
Yeah.
ultimately they work in it because they care about it.
Right.
It's just the standards aren't there that we need for our loved ones and family and friends and people suffering.
Is that an initial reaction of looking for someone to blame? Or
Yes, I think so. I think people go through various stages, and I think ultimately you want answers and you want to know. I mean, for me, it was a bit more clear cut because my mum was so incredibly poorly, and she had this nervous breakdown, and she was, you could look at her and you knew that she needed support and she wasn't getting that. For lots of people that are bereaved by suicide, they don't see the signs, and that's hard because where does the blame lie? Is it the person that's died? Is it the relatives that missed out on those signs that you look back on and think, actually I could have noticed that?
Yeah.
Or is it professionals if they were involved? But I think lots of people also don't just experience anger, they experience a whole host of emotions, including blaming that loved one that's died, and everything's normal and that's okay. It's just processing emotion as it comes and goes. That's okay.
If someone's out there now and listening and they're in trouble and they think, right, they're having suicidal thoughts, or they're thinking, I can't go on like this, what should be done? What should they do? And what should others do who are perhaps noticing others go through this?
I think remembering that you will not be the only person feeling that way is really important. Reaching out for support is really important. If you don't feel you're able to reach out for support yourself, leaning on loved ones, family and friends, and for them to be able to access that support for you. There's a whole community out there, and part of the work I do now, I actually work for a charity, not the NHS, but the charity is supporting the NHS.
Right.
Lots of charities are doing the same thing, and we're working on a transformation programme, which is something that is trying to interject social change as well as just looking at the medical model, which is what the NHS does. Lots of people are at home, as we've discussed, are stuck with COVID, isolated. Some people don't have social networks, and it's about exploring what support is out there in the community as well as what is just offered through the NHS. There's a lot of support in the community that people don't know about.
Yeah. What would your message be to people who are, especially like young people who are going through it? We often hear the message of mental health is now being spread amongst the young people, especially young people perhaps going at school, going through a tough time, through uni going through a tough time, or just generally through life going through a tough time. I mean, elderly people, I don't know whether they're better equipped to deal with it or not, but they've had a lot more life experience. But youngsters seem to be affected by it nowadays as well.
Yeah, I feel the younger generation are much more open-minded, if I can say that.
Of course.
I think they have new experiences and generational changes have come about, and sometimes the older generation, if I can say this, aren't as open-minded because they haven't been brought up to be.
That's right.
Nowadays it's more acceptable to talk. It's okay to not be okay, the big slogan that's often talked about. It's okay to reach out for help. It's okay to feel down and to remember it's just a period of time and that you will move through it. But young people are the new generation, I think. That's where the change is. So really it's just about being educated from the bottom up, learning about education in schools, I think, and really bringing it up for the people that aren't so aware.
You're in the profession yourself, and your mum was in the profession. And you've said that this profession resulted in what happened to your mum. What if someone wants to join this profession? What advice would you have for them? And what warnings would you have for them? If you think you need any, and what type of person does it take to succeed in this profession?
If I'm honest, I don't think any profession, I don't think mental health discriminates against any profession.
Right.
I think we all have mental health. We all have mental health to look after. Some people have mental illness, which is an extra thing to look after. I think for anybody going into a stressful job, whether it's mental health or not, it's self-care, it's looking after yourself, it's knowing your boundaries, it's learning about yourself. I think that's the key really with whether you're moving into mental health or not. I think my mum being in mental health shocks people, but I didn't think it's really any different to any other profession that's stressful.
And one thing that's really gets people talking is about social media and the use of social media. Do you reckon that's made things better or made things worse?
Both.
Both.
I think if you are looking at the wrong things and you're influenced by, all sorts really, things that might not be so positive, then that can be really negative. But there's a lot of help in the community, and a lot of that is through social media. There's a lot of pages you can follow. There's a lot of making yourself feel more positive affirmations, mental health charities you could be following, ambassadors and that kind of thing within the industry. There's a lot of help out there. It's just looking in the right places.
And what is your message for people who see this as a sort of taboo subject and they think, well, hold on, no, it's stigma, we don't want to talk about this, these things haven't happened, they're not talking about it, won't help us. What would you say to that?
It's a mindset that is of the past. We're not in that day and age anymore. It's okay to be open. The rest of the world is talking about it. So if you're not, then you're doing yourself as a disadvantage. You deserve to access the support that's available nowadays. Well, it's there to be found should you want it.
Carlie, you're a mental health nurse. If I was having problems, I would turn to a person like you and say, you know what, Carlie, I'm feeling down. This is what's happening to me. I need some tips on how to improve my mental health.
Yeah.
So go for it. What tips would you give for someone?
Tips. Regular sleep. Very regular sleep.
That's
the
important?
Basics. Very important.
Right.
So if you're really, really struggling with your mental health, I'd recommend going back to basics. If you're not functioning very well, back to basics. Regular sleep, eating well, drinking well, avoiding alcohol, smoking.
Yeah.
A small amount of social contact.
Yeah.
Feeling comfortable. Exercise is very good for you.
Okay.
Regular walks, mindfulness, yoga, meditation. There's an awful lot of support out there and things like apps, the Headspace app, the Calm app, really good for guiding you through times of anxiety and depression and giving you tips on a daily basis.
Wow. And what about organisations out there? I mean, when we reach out to organisations out there, what are the most common ones or the ones that you would recommend for us to reach out to?
Yeah, there are so many. Mental health in general, the Mind, www.mind.org.uk is fantastic. That's a place that will signpost you to lots of other places. There's charities such as Rethink. There are apps such as Staying Alive. For bereavement, there are places like survivors of, they're called SOBs.
Okay, yeah.
SOBS. They were fantastic for me. Weekly or monthly meetup groups are really, really supportive, but there's a whole host of resources out there.
So there is quite a lot of wide support network if we want to access it.
Absolutely, not just in the mental health field, the NHS, but in the community as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Carlie, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being open and honest. That's exactly what we needed. And thank you very much for your messages and wishing you the best for the future.
Thank you.